All right, welcome to this week's episode of Vets in Real Estate. I am joined by former Army Colonel, now turned realtor, Dave Abrams. So stay tuned and check out what we've got to talk about. All right, Dave, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us. We absolutely appreciate you being here. And I've got to say, it is interesting so far as when I started doing all this, I assumed that I would be talking to prior enlisted all the time. And it's been actually really interesting is that I've seen more officers and more senior officers like yourself that have actually made that transition, which actually kind of blew my mind that so many majors, lieutenant colonels, colonels that have retired and then making a career in real estate. It's got to be an interesting transition kind of coming from kind of the top of the pyramid, in the military order to starting a brand new career. What was that like for you?
Well, it's been great. I mean, I'll tell you, you said something that made me chuckle a little bit because I think saying the top of the pyramid for a colonel is a little bit like if you liken it to climbing Mount Everest, really a colonel is like being at base camp.
Fair enough. From
a dime a dozen when you're a colonel, but but I get it.
Fair enough. From a junior NCO, if I'm standing in front of the colonel, I've already screwed something up, right?
It's funny. And I was there. I was PFC Abrams, and I think I saw my brigade commander one time. So I always remembered that when I when I pinned on that rank. But one of the things that's been important to me is to kind of shuffle that off. I've cataloged and kept every lesson that I could have during my time in service, but it was very important to me that the hierarchy not be what follows me out of the military. Everybody's got a different reason for doing what they do when they post retirement, but for me, it was about starting something completely new. Like just turning a page and starting a new chapter in my life. And so that's why I decided to get into the real estate industry. A lot of great mentors and a lot of great former officers and NCOs as well that were already in real estate that have been part of that. But so it's been fantastic. I think what has been my touchstone is the discipline and the work ethic and the selflessness that's required in the military when you have a career in the military and just translating those characteristics of service into the real estate industry has been probably the foundation of my success.
Okay, so when you look at transitioning, you started rather early, and I guess having 20 plus years of military service, you kind of knew the day was coming. So I guess you could probably look at that a little bit further, where I think many of us on the enlisted side were like, yeah, I'm getting out. We're done. They're not going to give me not going to be a bonus. They're not going to be my assignment. So let me go ahead and just get out and go do something else. So you had some time. How far out before you actually knew you were going to retire did you actually start looking at a career in real estate?
Interesting question, because I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I didn't even know when I was going to retire. And then I was invited back to Afghanistan, specifically back to Kandahar, Afghanistan, for a third full year. And it was what's called a WIAS, a Worldwide Individual Augmentee System tasking, to do a job that basically an advisor job. Mm-hmm. And at the time, everybody that was following Afghanistan at the time knew that 2021 was coming, and it was just a matter of time. And so I knew, and I was in a pretty good job. I was going back to a place that I'd been, but I kind of knew when I got that that request to visit Kandahar again that I was going to retire when I got back. Like at that point, I was fully vested in my rank as a colonel. I wasn't competitive for any further promotions or commands or anything like that, and so I just didn't see myself. I could have stayed in another 5 years, but I didn't see myself. 5 years of staff work when I had the opportunity. I was still young enough to start something else. So I had essentially a 2-year lead time, knowing when I was going to get out. I started doing a lot of reading, and a stat that I don't know the exact stat, and I don't remember exactly where it came from, but it stuck with me in terms of just the basic concept, which was a high percentage of senior officers and senior NCOs that got out of the military and went straight to work had 3 jobs in the first 18 months out of service. Yeah. And it was a result of folks getting out and just realizing whatever they were doing, they hated it, and then just kind of feeling their way out. So what that did for me, and this is what I would translate to sort of a way to think about things for people getting out, is it made me think conceptually, how do I want to live, and then use that as a way to kind of lead me into whatever industry I was going to get into. I knew because of some experiences that I'd had that I didn't want to do federal workforce. That was out. Mm-hmm. And so that was off the table. And that's one of the big things that, especially retired senior officers and NCOs do is they wind up, going into a job in their same field, but in the federal workforce, which is great. And a lot of those people are, hugely just crushing it, in those fields. But it just wasn't what I wanted to do. So that was out. I looked into city government a little bit, but what I found in city government was that just like anything else, even if you were leading an organization of 1,200 people, a few years back in your career, mm-hmm. And you understand things like risk management and operational planning, you're still going to start in the bottom third of the totem pole. And then work your way up. I applied for some jobs I was fully qualified for that I was basically told, no, you can, we would love to have you somewhere further down the pecking order. And so again, it just became one of those things where I was like, I really, I don't want to start at the bottom again. And then I actually went and interviewed with corporate America, did some informational interviews. I had an interview with one big organization in town. And when I asked them a question about how can I, if I, I've got some real large enterprise experience, and so as an example, one of my jobs, I was the XO to the commander of the United States Southern Command, and so mm-hmm. I was at least in the room when major decisions were being made about the Western Hemisphere. Sure. So I was not instrumental in any of those decisions, but I was in the room and learned from and understood. So I have the ability, I think, to look across an organization and see conceptually maybe when something should change. And so I asked in this interview, if I see something organizationally that has to change, how do I affect change in this organization? And the answer was, well, you're coming in about 5 levels below the CEO, and to get your recommendation to the next level, you'll need 13 signatures. Jeez. I said, okay, all right. I don't, too much like being in the Army, right?
A little bit.
Yeah. So I decided I didn't want to do corporate America. That's probably a pretty shallow reason not to go into corporate America. But for me, it was just like, I wanted to, again, an opportunity to do something on my own. What I realized when I was going through all this, and this is important, is that autonomy was kind of a really key trait of whatever I was going to do. Because I had, in 1987, I enlisted. And so from 1987, every work day of my life from 1987 until 2019, I put on a uniform, stood in formation when required, and so all of a sudden it was like, they just became clear to me, and I was still pretty early on in my transition. So then I actually looked at some franchises, which I think is a great, there's great franchises out there. I get very specific and focused on 6 different franchises. One of them I actually almost bought into. It was called Mosquito Hunters, and the whole San Antonio territory was open at the time. And so, and one of my, if that's a route that folks go, the idea would be, I think what I did was the right thing, even though I didn't want to buy one, which was I set my parameters very tight and said, I only want, in my case, it was franchises that I could get into for the rapid small business loan, which at the time was $250. Mm-hmm. I didn't want brick and mortar. I wanted something I could walk into, right away and start to execute. And so I wound up. But then, as I got close to buying into a franchise, I started thinking about the fact that particular one that was going to work was seasonal, and then also that there's a split that goes to the franchisor no matter what. So if you're having a down year, you're still paying a big portion of revenue to the franchise. So that was out. So I had ruled out corporate America, government, and franchises. And so actually I did two things at the same time. I started a consulting business called Pie Piece LLC, is Planning is Everything, a planning consultancy. Because in the military, for the last 10 years of my time in the military, I was an operational and strategic planner. I also got my real estate license. My plan was to kind of do both and then see how it went. I got licensed about 6 months before I got out. And then while I was, a little plug for the brokerage, but while I was getting my license and talking to people about brokerages, I visited 5 or 6 brokerages. I had a sense in my mind that I wanted to be in an environment of professionals that were focused on, doing business ethically and treating the real estate industry in a professional manner, which is, I think the right thing to do. It's such a huge part of someone's life, especially on the residential side, but in the, for commercial as well, the business side. So anyway, I wound up selecting Phyllis Brown and Company during that time. I had a couple of kind of startup contracts in my consulting business, and I found out that it actually didn't really enjoy it. So I really focused. I doubled down on the real estate business, and within, first 6 months I did a couple of deals, but then from January of 2020 to December of 2020, I did about $10 million in sales and doubled it the next year. Added another third the next year. So I've been, and then I realized, this is a really, really long answer, sorry, but
no, it's good.
I realized, sort of towards the end of the second year, I had brought on a couple of other folks, another great vet, Rich Bailey, good friend of mine, had brought on to join we didn't really have a team at the time, but brought him on as a showing agent because I was getting so busy. And then by the end of my third year, I was so busy I couldn't keep up, and so that's when I decided to form the team. So now we're 5 years on as a team. We're about 32 million closed this year, and still got some deals out there that we're bringing on. So
yeah. So when you said you interviewed with several brokerages, what was that process like?
Yeah.
Because my career path's been obviously very different,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
So, what was that interview process like? And you don't have to throw out names of who they were, right? But what were those interviews like? What resonated? What didn't resonate? What ultimately ended you going to PBC based off of all those?
No, it's great questions. So one of them, I went to the guy who met me. One of the things for folks who are thinking about getting into real estate, specifically residential real estate, most brokerages will accept anybody with a license because if you're able to get your license through this, your federal license and through the state of Texas, you've passed at least a background check. So you've got kind of basic. You've shown the ability to take the test, and so most brokerages won't turn you down. So it becomes very important. Then it becomes incumbent on the new agent who doesn't really know anything about real estate to make a good decision. Because that can really be the difference between how fast you start and that sort of thing. And it's a business where you kill what you eat, or you eat what you kill. So it's like, if you go somewhere and you wind up there for a year without the kind of support you need, it's a big deal. So I knew that. I had gotten some good advice from some folks. I knew that was important. I went to one brokerage knowing that I was gonna have a lot of questions early on. So I wanted access to somebody in charge, right? Mm-hmm. In one particular case, when the guy, I showed up in a suit, the guy showed up in shorts and flip-flops. We went into his office. He put his feet up on the desk and we chatted, and I was and he was probably 20 years younger than me, which there's a lot of people way younger than me that are way better in the real estate, way smarter than me. That's an absolute fact. But I didn't feel like this was a guy when I was in a sticky situation or when I had a really difficult problem that I could close the door and say, what I mean? So I wanted that sort of feeling of mentorship and that there was somebody there that I could. Another brokerage I went to was very closed off. Like, went into the reception, everything, the reception desk was by itself. And then when you went to go see somebody, they came from the back to the front, opened the door, they brought you back, and every single agent had their own, was closed off. There was no it just felt like there was no sense of collaboration.
Fair.
And then when I wound up, and as I was going around, I didn't know anything about Phillips Brown and Company, but as I was going around through the neighborhood, and I happened to live sort of in 78209 and kind of Midtown, I guess, I was seeing those green signs everywhere. And so I was like, I'll check. And most new agents really don't know anything about Phillips Brown and Company unless they're
they're local.
Yeah,
or they've
local,
seen them, or
exactly.
they grew up in that clientele.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. So I actually wound up, and I didn't know enough about the brokers to know who to talk to. So I actually just looked up Phyllis's email online, and I sent her an email. She was very, very nice. She's just an incredible lady, obviously, and she connected me to Michelle Ellis and to Jennifer Shemwell, her daughter. And so I went and did interviews immediately when I walked in the office, and it's there's a lot of open collaboration going on. You can see this feeling, even though every agent represents their own individual business, you never get this feeling like you need to look over your shoulder. Like everybody's very focused on doing the best they can for themselves and helping each other when possible. And to me, that was huge. It really felt, more like a collaborative environment. And then, one of the secrets to my success is for the first year, I showed up. I didn't show up 8 hours every day, but I showed up for several hours every day that I was doing office work, and I plopped myself. I took up a space right across from Michelle Ellis's office, our director of sales, and at the Alamo Heights office. And so and she was super nice. I always had access when I had a question, and I think that's really important. So
yeah, I've said that for years, that there's so much value in just sitting there and listening to what's going on. You may have nothing doing. Maybe you're reading a book, just no deals, nothing going on, but just sitting there and listening.
Yeah.
And I know in my role, a lot of times too, when I get a referral that comes in, when I get, hey, we need to assign something, I'm going to look out in the bullpen and you know what? So-and-so's right there.
Yeah.
Let's give him a shot. Let's give them a shot. Let's let them go out there and work it. And there's so much value in just, honestly, just sitting there.
Yeah, absolutely. You got to show up. You got to show up. Yeah. Nothing happens unless you show up.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that, when new agents come in, we hear, well, negotiate your splits and do all that kind of stuff, which you never mentioned splits whatsoever. Yeah. Well, we'll talk about that in a second. But it was literally just being there and spending time and having access to folks. I on the splits conversation, again, you didn't bring it up. Was that not even a concern?
Again, I've gotten some good advice. I wish I could remember who it was from, but actually, I think, you know what? I'm going to give him a shout out. Johnny Morrow. I think now I'm not sure. I think he was his own broker at the time. But I had 3 of my 6 classes with him for licensing. He's just a fantastic, super great educator and real estate agent. I think he might be with Remax now. I'm not sure. But he, that was a topic that obviously is on a lot of folks' mind. And he was the one that said, if you're brand new to real estate, worry about your split later. Because there's so many other things that are more important.
Right.
What's the training program? What's the support system? Like all of those things. That's how I came into the business, was like when you worry about the money, it's hard to make it.
Fair.
When you worry about the things that make you a great agent, the money's going to be there. Like you're going to make money.
That will be our quote that we put up on
fantastic.
there right there. Right?
Yeah. No, it's fantastic. Because you hear the term commission breath, which I'm not a big fan of that term, but there's a sense of desperation that you emote. Right. And that not only do you emote that, so people catch it right away when you're just meeting people for the first time, but also if that's your primary concern, it can cause you to even unintentionally do things that are not in the best interest of your client. Mm-hmm. So if you keep the best interest of your client always at the forefront, then the money will come, because that's the word that gets spread out. Hey, I met this great agent, and he wants to make sure that you're taken care of, he or she, and that's always the most important thing. So,
no, that's good. So now you formed your team, the Ties team.
Yep.
That has no military affiliation, nothing like that. You don't brand yourself as the former colonel, retired colonel, nothing like that, right? Now, everybody, what I will say is the office, like, you need to meet David Abrams. He's a retired colonel. Like, that's what they told me from the very beginning. And I know when you and I met for the first time, we briefly talked about, what'd you do in the service? What'd you do? Okay, cool. And then, 3 minutes later, that was the rest of that was the it, right?
Yeah. No, it's so absolutely deliberate. Every single member of my team has some military affiliation. So I've got a couple of military brats. They didn't serve themselves, but their parents did.
Mom, dad did, sure.
Yeah. I've got a couple of military spouses, my spouse included. Former or current. I don't have any serving current military spouses right now, but open to it for sure. And then I've got a former Marine and then a couple of retirees. So everybody on the team has at least some connection to the military and understands the terminology and the lifestyle, right? And that's been deliberate as well. But what I thought about early on was this: if you go over the top to wrap yourself in the flag, right, it almost seems exploitative in a way. And so what I wanted to do is really make and then one of the big it's going to get very philosophical, but
no, it's good stuff.
One of the big topics that you hear about a lot in when you're talking political science, domestic politics, things like that, is this civil military divide, right? There's you hear the stats all the time, 1% of the population that's ever served or knows somebody who served or whatever the number is, right? I think it's a little higher than that, and I think that's there, right? There's a big portion of the population that there's a lot that think the military is overpaid and a lot of that, and then a lot of that is kind of percolating under the surface, even while we've got this kind of hyper patriotism going on, right? So, and I felt like being an agent that came out and said, "You've got to work with me because I'm a vet," was contributing to that a little bit, or would contribute to that a little bit, right? And so the philosophy that I have is, hey, soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, Coast Guard, and everybody else, this is what's accessible to you. In the I work at a brokerage that's known for luxury, but I've sold just this year everything from $150,000 to $2.75 million, and basically all price points in between. What I want to communicate to the the veteran and service member community is there's no divide. There's just great service, and then there's not great service. There's great access, and then there's not great access, and so. That's kind of I don't know if that comes across as well, when I say it out loud as it does in my mind, but so the idea would be, and I think most people know what my background is, it's on my website and all that stuff. So
right.
Yeah. So I don't think I have to.
You don't hide it.
Yeah. Right. Exactly right. I don't hide it. I'm super proud of it. But also, and you and I were talking before we started, I don't carry, there's no rank that carries forward when you get out of the military. Right. Nobody has it. There are some people that
carry it with them,
and they do it to good effect because somebody they move into a position where it's necessary. But what I realized that I didn't want to do was I didn't want to walk into a company that just really wanted me because of the people that I had met while I was in the military. I wanted to be able to use that that list of contacts myself as part of my own, my own business, and then I could make decisions about, how and who I talk to and that sort of thing. But I think a lot of folks have a hard time making that transition because they feel like, well, I was whatever, I was.
That's all I am. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Not only is that all I am, but everybody needs to recognize it. It's like, well, what you are. You are every ounce of blood, sweat, and tears and education and discipline that got you to the rank of colonel. All of that's still there. And all of that is super, super applicable to anything you do when you get out of the military. But the rank doesn't matter. And there are plenty of, retired captains that have all of those same characteristics too. And guess what? They're in the same workforce.
Right.
And so if you show up thinking that because you made it to a certain level in the military, you're owed something, it's the wrong way to move forward, in my opinion. So,
no, and I think even as you transition out, the vast majority of the civilian population, to them, a sergeant or a colonel, it's like, I don't know the difference. Who outranks who? Like whatever. Like they don't know the difference, right? Yeah. So. I think that's always been the interesting thing as well was, the assumptions that kind of come along is that, oh, you were a sergeant, so you were in charge of like tens of thousands of people. And I was like, I was in charge of like 7, right? But like from their perspective, they have no idea. So I can see what you're saying is that the experience absolutely,
Yeah.
but the general population looks at us as the same. They don't really see a difference unless they're familiar with that lifestyle and all that, which, in San Antonio, you probably have a little bit more of that understanding. But I mean, I can recall when, wait, so how many people did of course, how many people did you kill and how many people were you in charge of? Like those questions that pop out right away. But they didn't know me from, if I told them I was a specialist or a sergeant major, they wouldn't have a clue. It's all the same thing. So that's interesting, though, that we both kind of had that same mindset, a bit, where I think with my brokerage, I went a little more subtle, that if you're around the military, you pick up the reference right away. If you're not, maybe not. But so you just deliberately said, don't want to look military, don't want to look veteran-owned, not going to hide from it. How did that work in moving into, I guess, the luxury side of the business, right? A lot of new age, even existing agents, you can look at the lab coat agents and all that kind of stuff online, right? You can look at it, and every third day there's, how do I break into luxury? How do I break into commercial? How do I break into, not selling the, whatever I'm selling? How did you break into luxury?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't even know if I wouldn't necessarily say I'm broken into luxury. I've got my eyes like over the ledge a little bit, in the luxury market. I mean, so I guess there's a couple of ways, right? One is by virtue of my extensive network, 32 years of professional life, and I think this is an important thing for folks to hear. 32 years of professional life and a relatively low percentage of negative interactions with people. They weren't. It wasn't always candy corn and pumpkin pie or whatever. But I don't even know if that's a saying, but I like it.
It works for me.
but I mean, I think throughout my career, I was able to to move through relationships without pissing off too many people. And so I left the military with a decent, reputation and good level of trust, right? Mm-hmm. And so when I started telling people that I was in real estate, I got, and I still continue to get a lot of word of mouth referrals. Not necessarily from, I don't necessarily doing deals directly with the people that I know, but hey, I know this guy in San Antonio is looking for somebody to help him buy or sell. And then just by virtue of the length of time, a lot of those people, because they're, people my age are making the referrals, right? These are folks that either, left the military relatively early and then were CEOs of a business by the time I met them, or retired colonels who now have another great job and a pension. And so they're looking at the $1 million price point houses. So that was the catalyst for me. It wasn't that I went out searching for those kinds of homes. I just went out searching to help people. And it just happens to be where my network sort of grows to or goes into. But there's plenty of other agents that are working with those folks as well. The other thing that I've done, and I think if you go to my website and look at my featured properties, it'll be very apparent. I've developed a brand consistency that doesn't change. The only thing that we spend more money to market a $2.75 million house, but every house is staged, every house is professionally photographed. And every buyer client gets the same treatment as well. So we don't, so I think when there's a consistency that says we're doing all of these things for the client, that translates itself. And so that's how I wound up with some of the more expensive listings. I actually had one of my current listings. The guy called me out of the blue because I was marketing a house similar to his in the $900,000 range. And he just called me and said, I'd like you to meet me at this house. I looked through all your pictures. I like your marketing. And that was how I got the business. I'd never heard of the guy before. And now we got a good relationship. So I think brand consistency is super important. The TIES is an acronym. A lot of people don't know that. So TIES stands for trust, integrity, expertise, and service. Okay. And it's actually written backwards to the way our motto is: we serve our customers with expertise and integrity in order to earn their trust. And then we just put it back in the ties. And so we have the bow tie logo and all that stuff. So that's, all of that thing goes together to build the brand, and a culture is really kind of what I'm trying to do too, is that culture. I think anybody in my team will tell you that, we always and it's not a platitude, but we always do right by the client first. Nobody on the team is desperate to close a deal if it's not right for the client.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So how is that? Because I know many, even those that have been in the industry for a little bit now, are looking. Okay, where's that next step? Where do I go? You've obviously
Yeah.
built the team very quickly.
Yeah.
Then again,
Right.
not every agent's walking out doing 10+ million in their
Right.
first year, right?
Right.
Which is probably worth the whole conversation right there. How did you get there? How did that transition from building a team, which probably was very natural to you, just kind of given your experience in the military, building
Yeah.
teams, putting together? What was, I guess, the pros, the cons? What was that struggle like actually
Yeah.
building the team?
Yeah. I mean, it's you use the past tense, but it's a daily struggle. It's like any other organization. Do I have it right? What do I have? And I have so much to do, to systematize and make our our processes better and our marketing better and all those things. And so, but you're just taking a little bite at a time. I followed. I got off track some, but then I went back to it. But there's a great book called The $1 Million Real Estate Agent, and I, as far as organization was concerned, that's the direction I went, and I wasn't sure really when to start. I mean, and I had read that book when I was still in real estate school, so I knew that was 'cause I wasn't going to just start this and not do it.
Study.
And so, yeah, and also not like I wasn't going to go halfway. I was still kind of torn between consulting and doing real estate, but very quickly I decided that I wasn't going to be a consultant. So I mean, I'm a real estate consultant, but not a business and management consultant, leadership and stuff. So, but early on, in that, before I think I maybe closed one or two deals, and Michelle Ellis, I was talking to her, and I was juggling a bunch of balls, and I was trying to figure out what my next, like what was the most important thing to do. And there's also another one called The One Thing, another book called The One Thing, which is another great book. They happen to be Keller Williams books, but
I've read them both.
Yeah, great books, right?
Even on the commercial side, reading the MREA, I was like, okay, this doesn't make any sense for my business, but the system that they're replacing. I think they'd use a stat, something like for every 100 homes you send mail to, you'll get 3 or whatever.
Right.
I forget what the exact stat was, something along those lines, where it's like systematized, and then the more and more you do it, here's what you're going to see your market grow. And I was like, oh, well, the system makes it, maybe not to my business, but the system itself makes sense.
Yep. Yeah, exactly right. And there's some of the marketing stuff. I should probably go back and reread it, because some of the marketing stuff I'm not doing the way I should. I am a big believer. One of the things they talk about in that book particularly is, for every listing you should have at least 2.5 is the, I don't know how you get a half a closing, but at least 2.5, statistically speaking, over the long. And it's based on open houses and meeting buyer clients, and then also people coming to see your listing. Oh, I would like you to list my house, and of course, obviously closing that one, the one that's listed, which isn't always a given. What Michelle said to me, I like literally wet behind the ears. She looked at me and she goes, "You have a lot going on, right?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "You need an assistant," and I was like, closed like 2 deals. Like I don't need an assistant. She goes, "No, I'm serious. I've never seen anybody start the way you did." And so, and then of course, and that's the first thing. Your admin staff is the first thing that you. And so, what I've really tried to follow in that book is the way you grow the real estate organization. So I've got an assistant. I got a showing agent, which is the next thing. And that kind of went off track a little bit, because the next thing you're supposed to have is a listing agent, right? And so I kind of went off track and hired a couple agents that didn't work out. Decided that they wanted to go a different direction. But then when I wound up coming back, now I've got a listing coordinator. So now I've got full-time paid staff, listing coordinator, and then transaction coordinator / administrative assistant. So she does a lot. And then marketing. My wife does the marketing. And so those are 3 important positions that are they recommend that you have as a baseline. And then you start adding to that staff as you get more and more agents.
Yeah. So how? First, I'm going to preface this by I love you, dear. But how do you work with your wife? how does that transition? Because my wife's threatened me a few times, right?
Yeah.
And I say that threateningly and lovingly.
Of
Is maybe I should come work for you. And to be fair, my wife would be an amazing business development person.
Yeah.
I don't know how we would work together.
Yeah.
We work well together in a marriage. Right. But how's that working with your spouse and that situation? Obviously, keep in mind, don't want you sleeping on the couch tonight either.
No. I got nothing but good things to say. I will say, she rightfully so Carolyn and I, we were when we were looking at this military transition together, right? And so when we were looking at franchises, the idea was actually we're going to do this franchise thing as a couple, and we're going to be a family-owned business kind of thing. And then we decided not to do it. When I started talking real estate, she's like, "Okay, you're on your own there because I don't want to work weekends, nights, and."
Yeah.
And so then now 4 years later, it's like, okay, you're working weekends and nights and I'm not. So we're not seeing each other, But she had a great gig that she was really good at as a manager of the Fort Sam Houston thrift shop. It was a part-time nonprofit thing, part-time, full-time, part-time pay, full-time work.
Sure.
And she was doing that and really enjoying it. But what we found was, like I mentioned, we just weren't seeing each other a lot. In addition to that, because we've been married for 20 plus years, a lot of the contacts and referrals and stuff like that we had were people that we both knew.
Sure.
And so she was coming towards the end of, I think she'd agreed to do 2 or maybe 3 years as the manager at the thrift shop. And she was coming up towards the end of that and, knew she wanted to do something different. And I said, I had asked her a few years earlier, why don't you get your real estate license? And she said no. And then she decided to give it a shot. So she got licensed this January. I think it's been, you have to, when you're working with your spouse, you have to be very mindful of how you approach, things that you want to do differently or whatever. But overall, I think obviously it's going to be personality driven as well. But it's for us, this is part of what drove it. I was super busy. I'd be on the phone all day talking to people on the team about what was going on. And my team, by the way, has doubled this year. So I was just 4 people on the team up until December last year. Now we're at actually more than double. We got 9 now, and that was a deliberate reason. I'll tell you in a minute. But so I was just running, on all cylinders. And I'd finally come home at night and sit down on the couch, and she'd say, How's that deal on Bluff Oak going? And I'd just be like, if you had your real estate license, we could have been talking about this 5 or 6 hours ago.
Yeah.
And I could call you and so so that was really kind of a catalyst for she was super interested. We renovated our house together in Belmead. She's got an amazing eye. She's bought and sold several houses together, but she actually, before she and I were even dating, she had purchased and sold a house. And so she just kind of a real natural in the real estate industry. She decided to take the plunge. She got her license, and yeah, it's been great. So,
awesome.
Yeah. I think we've gotten closer together because of it, in my opinion. So
Fair.
I don't know if she would say the same thing.
Maybe we'll have her next and
yeah. Bring her on.
How is it working with your husband?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I was going
right. So, kind of wrapping everything up. If you had to sit down and go back to the handful of years ago when you started, what do you think you would have done differently? If there was something you could have learned differently, or you wish you'd have done a little bit differently, what do you think that would have been?
Yeah. So I still believe to this day that if I had a better handle on, and this is one of the things that Carolyn's doing for me now, which is going to bear tons of fruit for us. But if I had a better handle on client relationship management and managing my database from the start. Yep. And everybody talks about it, but actually physically doing it is super hard, especially the busier you get. But the more, the better you are at keeping those relationships going and making sure that people know you're available to help and those sorts of things. I mean, absolutely important. What else? I think that's probably the most important thing. I fortunate that the brokerage has been there every step of the way to kind of give me the support I needed when I needed it. So, yeah.
No, that's great. And I mean, I'm 15 years into this, and I had to hire an admin to manage my CRM because I started off the wrong way. So I totally get where you're coming from. Absolutely. Yeah. And I don't know. That's one of the things I'd say all the time with somebody coming in new, like just work those systems, get good habits your first 2 years in, just build those good habits, even if it feels silly. Yep. Build it, because 10 years, 15 years, 20 years from now, you're going to go like, man, this is easy. This is how I'm supposed to do business, not trying to reinvent the wheel because you've had, 10 years of bad habits. So
or having to pump the flat up every year, right? So that's
Right.
kind of, I do want to say for folks interested in this business or any other business, especially a business that has some level of autonomy, have a vision. Have a vision for where you want to go. Don't just bump along because there's plenty of people that'll run you over if you're bumping along. So have a vision, and then protect the vision and move towards it. And then it's okay if the vision changes, but if you don't start with one, you're wasting time until you figure out what the vision is. And so that's kind of, for me, that's I think been the driving force for where I want to go.
yeah, I can't think of a better way to wrap that up. That was great. Appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us, and hopefully we got questions. You're more than happy to jump in
Anytime.
and answer those questions when they come in. So
Absolutely.
appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks.